Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by Ndis Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host from Ndis Property Australia, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing Ndis world. Today we have a special guest speaker, Peter Ingram, a Ndis property specialist. I've invited Peter to come on our show to tell us all about him, his journey in the Ndis world and where he's at in the SDA market. Peter, welcome.
G'day, Minh. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody. I hope you have a great morning to date. And thanks for having me on today, Minh. I'm excited to have a chat. And if I can provide some value to your listeners, that's awesome.
Wonderful. Peter, what's your background in the property world? Let's start with that first.
Well, look, it's, I guess, where I started in property. I started back as a trade. I originally was an electrician back in the day as a young bloke many moons ago. And then from there, I sort of moved into project management and business management. And then I became a life coach, a business coach for some time and had a real passion for helping people. And then I always wanted to invest in property. I knew it was the right thing to do. I think like many Australians, we have a mindset that you think you can't do it, maybe because of your upbringing. I had a single mother, so I was always told that you don't get in debt because her mother went through a depression, and that's the same mindset for many Australians. I found that they get in this mindset they can't invest, don't want to get in debt, and don't do anything for their future. And unfortunately, that leaves many people in a position where they cannot retire with their sufficient funds. I think that it's a shocking stat. I think I read Australia Bureau statistics a few years ago saying that 89% of Australians would retire on less than $16,000 per annum. So that really motivated me to do something about my own investing. And I guess when I bought my first investment property, I met a builder friend of mine that helped me buy my first two properties. And then I loved what he did. So I was state manager for Hills Industry at the time. I ended up leaving that role and joining him with my passion to help people and my trade and building project management background, and got into the property investment and building space back in 2010, I think that was. So 2009, actually 2008, 2009, that was. So that's where I started. And from there, I recently sold that company I finished up with that company in June this year. So that was an exciting almost 14 years of business. We helped thousands of people invest in property successfully. And in that last 4 years, we got into the NDIS space. So that's what we're predominantly talking about today. So that's where we sort of got started.
And Peter, what got you into the SDA space? I mean, here you are doing normal property and coaching investors and doing all those builds around Australia. Then all of a sudden you're pivoting towards NDIS all of a sudden. What triggered that movement over there?
Yeah, look, when we first heard about NDIS, it sounded too good to be true. I'm sure many investors have heard the returns when it comes to investing in NDIS. They are very high returns. And that sort of thought, I thought, well, why would they pay, why would the government be paying $150,000 a year, for a house in a rental return? I mean, that sounded ridiculously high. But it wasn't until I sat down with an SDA provider that actually approached us, because we had a great track record in building all over the country. They had demand all over the east coast of Australia. So they approached us and said, well, we're looking for a department with a build contractor, and that also has investors. So we thought, okay, well, let's have a listen to what they have to say. So that's how it really started. And my first question was, can you please tell me, why are the returns so high? They do sound too good to be true. And it wasn't until that conversation where the lady told me that, it costs up to $1 million to leave one person in hospital for 12 months. And many are in nursing homes where it's going to be $80,000 to $100,000 a year for just one person for their care. So all of a sudden it made some sense. Well, the NDIS is obviously for helping people with disability. That's awesome. But it also gets them back out in the community into nice homes. And then I found out many were living in nursing homes. You've got people, in their 30s, 40s, 50s who should not be in nursing homes. It's not for people that have a disability, which I thought that's not great, obviously. And then also people that were living in group housing that, again, I heard horror stories of group housing. And there's so many benefits that made sense all of a sudden. One, the government's saving money. Importantly, people with disability are getting back in the community and better care. And then investors can make an outstanding return that's backed by the government, and also it creates the economy, which helps everybody. So it was a win-win-win all the way around as far as I could see it. But I realised very early from that point on that you really had to be working with the right people in this space.
Okay, well, speaking with working with the right people, how have you found working with property investors the last few years? Was it difficult for them to grasp or go through the same thought pattern that you went through yourself? Or was it very easy for them to accept it and move forwards pretty quickly with regards to investing in the SDA?
Yeah, I think, as you would know, Minh, everybody's different. You deal with all types of investors. I think all investors know when they first hear about it, their first thought is it sounds too good to be true. Why the return's so high. But as soon as you actually explain these reasons and run through the important factors to get right, they do understand it. But when it comes to different investors, I think in the early days when we first started, almost 4 years ago now, there was a lot less people had never even heard of NDIS. So when you spoke about NDIS, they said, well, what's that? Is that actually, I heard, or they may have heard it's about disability, but what's it to do with property? And when you explained, what it's about and why it's so important, that it made them understand, that it can be a good investment for the right people. I guess the biggest hurdles we had in the early days was finance. Finance was difficult. There was only NAB, or the only Big Four bank in Australia, lending for NDIS, but you needed a 30-70 LVR, so you needed a 30% deposit and then borrowing the other 70%. But then obviously, because they were just treating these properties as standard residential properties, the valuations were very low. So often people would have to have almost a 50% deposit and cost. So that cut a lot of people out of the market. And why were the valuations low? Well, they were valuing these properties as if they were normal residential properties. Now, look, there's no doubt these properties, you want to build them so they look like a normal home, so people with disability feel like they're going into a nice new home, not into a hospital feel. And they want to be in nice neighbourhoods where anybody would want to live. But importantly, there's lots of little things throughout the build that does add up to substantially more money when you're looking at the all little things. It's not one big cost. That was one of the questions I used to get asked quite often. It was, well, why are they more expensive? Well, it's just every little step along the way when it comes to building NDIS is an additional cost. Even from your drafting, you need has to be have a draft company that can draw certified NDIS plans, so having NDIS certifiers on board, having SDA providers to provide density stamps to make sure the property has that right density requirements. And then all the way through, the tolerances in the build, every little step takes more time for the trade to make sure they get it right. Because if you don't meet the criteria, you won't get compliance. So it's very important you're working with builders that have a good track record and have a real good high quality assurance system within their building company to make sure they do meet all these criteria. Then the little inclusions. Again, there's not one big inclusions, but when you're looking at backup power systems, power to every window, power to every door, you've got engineered structure in the ceilings for hoist systems in bedrooms, the higher ceilings, wider doorways, all these things all add up to make it a more expensive property than a normal property. But when you look at the returns you're getting, obviously that extra money up front is well worth it in the long run with the ongoing returns. So I guess they were the first few things that we saw were hurdles trying to get over. One, the finance. Why is it more expensive? How's it all work? Who rents the property? How do you lease a property? Is there a guarantee for 20 years? Well, all these sort of things. So I guess those are the biggest things. There's no guarantee. It is a specialised investment. But, the head leases, once I understood them, there was a head lease, the SDA had a head lease with the property for the 20-year term in most cases. And that would be every different SDA might have a 5 + 5 + 5 or a 10 + 10 or 10 × 2. And then they would, when their house is completed, they can then transition the participants into the home with that. And in most cases, they would be having the same tenancy lease with the participants as your head lease, so they aligned. But everything's different. But I guess those are the main questions about, how it works, how's NDIS work, what is it, why should you invest in it, what are the risks? There's typical questions like anybody should have when they're investing in any type of property.
Gotcha. Thanks for the explanation, Pete. What are the top 3 mistakes you see people make in the marketplace when it comes to SDA?
Well, I think certainly now more than ever. I think in the early days you could pretty much build a property in any good location and there was participant demand. But yeah, the biggest thing is getting that working. Number one problem, biggest mistake would be is if someone is trying to sell a property as if it was a normal property, meaning that when you build a normal investment property, you would look for the criteria for high capital growth, good rental returns, good low vacancy rates, and then you might just build that property in that location, and you would then give it the house to a property manager. The property manager goes out there and starts sourcing you some tenants for that home. Well, that's a real back to front process when it comes to NDIS. You really need to start with the participants in mind. You should need to be talking to SDA or SDA providers that have a true care for participants. Participants are what they call the people with disability, as in the tenancy, for the listeners who may not know that. So it's important to be working with the SDA and SDA providers up front, knowing where they have demand for properties, what type of properties they're looking for. Are they houses? Are they 2-bedroom houses? Are they 3-bedroom houses? Are they high physical support? Are they preventability? Are they robust for people with mental disability? Are they villas for single people who are funded to live by themselves? What are all the different attributes that we need to cover to make sure we've got this build correct when we are building a property and the location right? So number one, definitely make sure you're starting with the participants first in mind, and don't just buy like a normal investment property. Number two, when you're looking at those locations, definitely make sure that you are building locations that are meeting all the criteria of an SDA and SDA provider that have demand for the property, and not just building out in a location that's already been saturated with these properties. So that's it. That's very important. And thirdly, definitely the building floor plans, designs, and inclusions. One, you want a quality property, and we want to make sure you got compliance. There's horror stories out there where people have built through companies that don't have a background in building NDIS, and they may not get compliance, or it might be costly to get compliance. So, like you do, Minh, you're working with companies that you're working with for years that actually do have that background, which is important to make sure you get compliance. But when it comes to inclusions, and in floor plans, the biggest thing really is size. You see a lot of companies out there, they'll pick the cheapest land locations in Australia. They'll then put on a very small house, might be a 3 high physical support house, and they'll make it like a 220 metre squared house. It's just too small for 3 people to live in with a disability. So it's very unlikely that you're going to get participants in that home. Well, you might get 1, you might get 2, but you will very unlikely get 3. And if it's in a poor location that's oversaturated with too many other properties, then your demand's going to be much, much lower. I think over time it will fill, because if you look at what the latest stats are coming up by NDIS, there's huge numbers of requirements up until 2040s when sort of these large figures go to. The numbers could keep almost compounding. Unfortunately, people get born with disabilities, and people have accidents on an ongoing basis. And when you look at mental disability these days, it's also very big. So it's ongoing.
Peter, I've seen over the years the average 4-bedroom HPS house, which is carer plus 3, is about 230 square meters is the average. Unfortunately, you only normally see 2 participants in that scenario normally, okay? And that's assuming a 1 living space. Now, to actually if you really want that 3rd participant in the HPS house, you got to look at a 260, 270, 280 square meter home and a second living area. Do you agree with that?
Oh, that's 100%, Minh. You're on the money there, mate. You definitely need to have... Look, I'd put 2 living spaces in almost every house, even if it's a 2-participant home. And I would certainly, if you're building a 3-participant house, I wouldn't build it definitely any smaller than sort of 255 metres. You can make a good 255 metre square design if it's drawn correctly. I mean, a lot of drafting companies don't they waste space. So there's a lot of meters added on, and meters squared means money. Every meter costs you money. So you want to design a house so you're optimizing the floor plan to not waste space in like voids and wasted hallways and things like that. So that can cost you money. But yeah, you're 100% right, mate. I mean, if you've got a 3-participant house, you get 2 participants in there, you're still getting a very, very strong return compared to a normal investment property, but it's not what you're going for. If you're building a 3-participant house, in most cases, you would like to have 3 participants in there. But yeah, 100% right, mate. Bigger is better. It doesn't make any difference with NDIS. So.
True. And Peter, the changes in the income that happened 2 months ago on July the 1st, you'll see that the numbers are, if you have a 3rd participant, it is a marginally more better in income-wise. Marginal. So back in the old day, being 3 years ago, people thought, three-bedroom HBS is probably the maximum outcome. Probably, yes. The reality was you're getting 2 participants anyway, not 3. That's the first thing. And secondly, in today's market, if you've got to go build a extra large house at 3,000 bucks a square metre for an extra 30 square metres, that's actually 90 grand in costs. Which shouldn't you even spend 90 grand costs when you're only making a marginal increase in income, really?
Yeah, well, look, again, you're on the money there. I mean, when you look at the new NDIS arrangement, the pricing structure, there's no doubt they've changed the returns on a two participant house versus a 3. They've changed the villa funding. They've changed the apartment funding. They've done that for a reason, clearly, that there's obviously been a shortfall of 2 participant houses being built. And as you would know, the returns, well, back, as you say, to even a year ago, a 3 participant house, you might have returned $150,000 on average around the country for 3 participants in a home. And so that was what everybody was striving for. But now with the new returns, just a 2 participant house with 2 participants in it, it's well over $150,000 a year. It can be up to $220,000 a year in places like Darwin because they have a higher location factor. Each city, as you know, but your listeners might, each city or suburb has different location factors that you multiply the NDIS allocation by to give you the total income plus the RRC, regional rental contributions. So yeah, what people were hoping to get. So if you're in construction right now and you were hoping to get $150,000 a year for 3 participants, even if you got 2 participants now and you register a 2-participant house, your returns are much higher, even if you had the lowest level of care, which is improvability.
Exactly.
So yeah, look, so clearly there was a shortfall of 2 participant houses being built, and clearly there was a shortfall of houses being built for people with improvability, which is the lowest level of care. So yeah, I think, and back to your meter squared and costs, I think when you look at the ratio of what to invest in now as an investor, I think you for the cost of building a property, 2 high physical support house that can accommodate high physical support, fully accessible and improvability, the 3 different levels of care, and will also be a smaller home, which means a smaller block of land is required. So less cost in the land, less cost in the build, yet your returns are much higher. I think off the top of my head, I think it's like $75,000 for improvability and $85,000 for high physical support per participant. So if you've got 2 in there at improvability, that's $150,000 plus their regional rental contribution, which is their 25% of their NDIS funding and their 100% of their Commonwealth housing, their rental funding. So that's another $10,000 roughly. It's actually a bit more than that. So, but you're looking at another $20,000 on top.
So you mentioned Darwin earlier. So what areas? How have you been vetting areas yourself as a professional in the NDIS space?
Yeah, so I do, because we are our companies, I'm specialising in building and development. So I've got a development going over in Perth for an apartment right now, which I'm obviously going to hold one of those properties. We're doing a lot of builds right now for ourselves that will split a block and put 2 houses on that block, or put two participant high physical support house on both sides. And Darwin is definitely one of those places I'm currently looking at a block right now to do that on for myself, as long as plenty of investors are also looking at Darwin and obviously other locations around the country as well. Darwin's has a higher metre squared cost to build in Darwin. Land can be a bit more affordable than some other, well, definitely more affordable than some capital cities in Australia. But yeah, your build prices are higher, but your returns, they're like, when we talk about the location factor, it's 1.18 for a house. So if you're getting, for easy maths, $100,000 a year, in Darwin you get $118,000 plus the RRC versus maybe if you looked at like Logan in Brisbane, which I think is about 0.9, so you would get $90,000 a year. So you can see that's a $30,000 difference just because of the location factor. So that's obviously attractive to investors.
But as you may agree, Peter, investors should not be driven by the location factor, correct?
Yeah, look, if you're an investor, you should be just focused on what's right for you, what you're looking for. Some people, look, I personally am building more in closer to CBDs, looking for knockdown rebuilds. We do a lot of that where we will knock houses down and split blocks, or even just knock a house down and build some villas or a house on them. I think the closer you can get to this, if investors can afford to spend more money on land, then that's going to be a long-term greater investment for them. For capital growth, it's going to be higher capital growth drivers. And yeah, people with disability are different than you and I. They want to live in nice locations and closer to the CBD or closer to, or even on like Port Macquarie, Coffs Harbour. They're locations which are in high demand as well because the land's more expensive. So anywhere where land's more expensive, less people have been investing in the NDO space, and there's still huge demand for housing. So yeah, and look, even places like for affordability is regional Queensland. When I say regional, I don't mean like the big cities, Townsville, Mackay, those sort of places. They have a lot of numbers now. But if you look into smaller towns, we have an SDA, for example, that specialises in those regional areas, and they want houses throughout regional Queensland that we're currently now looking for land to build on, which provide a more affordable investment for people who are looking for more affordable investments.
Peter, you spoke earlier about the importance of providers. When do you think an investor should engage a provider in their process, on their journey of jumping into SDA?
Great. Well, look, the SDA is, you don't often get access to SIL providers as an investor. You'll have access to an SDA that has pathways of SIL providers, support coordinators, the different public guardians, Department of Housing. They have all access to all types of their pathways, which participants are at now. So you want to be talking to SDAs that have these pathways, importantly. But when you should start talking to them is certainly, in my previous company, we wouldn't let anybody move forward to financial commitment until they had spoken to the SDA. Because again, we're building houses for the SDAs, SIL providers in the locations they want them. The questions we get as an investment company, as you would know, Minh, is all about their services and what the costs are and how it all works. So it's important to have that conversation with an SDA provider. In my old company, we used to, once clients got past contracts, but they hadn't got financial commitment yet, hadn't got unconditional finance, they weren't committed to the investment, I would do an introduction to the SDA. They could ask them all the questions they had, and when they're 100% confident in their decision, they move forward. And nearly everybody moves forward. I think, to be honest, I think 100% did. But it's important from our perspective that, that they do speak to an SDA early, understand where the participant demand is, what their costs are for participant placement, their management fees, because every SDA is a bit different. So I think very early is the answer. And then, keeping them, and then having a head lease signed as once once your house has got unconditional finance and the house is now moving forward, once you've got BA, once you've got building approvals and the building's about to start, if you're comfortable with that SDA provider, then you should sign their head lease, and then they can start the participant placement process by putting your property out there to their pathways. So it's going to be completed in 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, 12 months, depending on where you're building. Every city in Australia has different build timeframes. But yeah, that's very important. And staying in contact with them throughout the path of the journey, either you do as an investor or the company you're working with, just keeping the SDA updated on the updates of the progress of the build so they know where it's at. So on completion, the house is enrolled into the NDIS and they can start transitioning participants into the home as soon as possible.
Peter, I've come across a lot of clients who've come to me in the past few years and they don't have a provider. They were sold a property and then they've built the house and they're now wondering what's next. In your perspective, if there's someone out there listening to this show right now and they have no provider engaged to their almost built house, how should they begin the process of sourcing, investigating options for them to talk to someone to be an SDA provider? What would you recommend them to do?
Look, I think there's, obviously you can ask people like yourself and get some feedback on who you recommend.
True, but if they're in the middle of nowhere in Adelaide and they've known the agents run away, gone disappeared, and the house is almost built and they have no one to talk to, how should they begin the process to find options for them to help them out?
Yeah, look, there's a website called Housing Hub that has access to a lot of SDA providers. You can otherwise you just need to Google SDA providers. You can go to NDIS. They got a list of SDA providers. But, when we look at some of these lists, a lot of these SDA providers could be just mum and dad. They've got SDA license to get funding for their children, for example. So the key is you're doing your research and look at places like Housing Hub and
SDA Finder as well, Peter.
SDA Finder. Yeah, okay. I've never looked at that one myself because I always get SDA supervisors approaching me, so I'm never really on the hunt for them. So, but if you're in that situation, certainly use those resources, and then if you need help, always reach out. Happy to help ourselves. So.
I think on the system, the NDIS system portal, there are 1,600 registered SDA providers. Now, as you said, most of them just mum and dad looking after their child. So my gut feeling is, and you tell me if I'm right, I reckon only probably 100 big names out there around Australia, 100 to 200.
I think you're right. I think a lot of them aren't even in operation anymore when you go to that list. So and when you say 100, there's lots of that really are just property managers that have got an SDA license. They don't really have the pathway connections. I think you need to work with people that really care as well. You can really tell the difference when you're talking to an SDA provider that truly cares about the participants and wants to match the right people to live together and make sure this is their home forever. So that's one thing I've found over the time. I've spoken to many SDAs and around the country, and some are very good and some just seem to be in it for the money grab. So I think it's trying to get that right. Again, asking them questions about how they place participants, and you'll soon hear if they've got true care factor for the people with disability. That's
so true, Peter. In the first 5-10 minutes of talking to someone, and you can tell in their voice and their terminology that they have no experience in the care world or the disability world. You can tell straight away whether they're really experienced and they know what they're doing. And it shouldn't be too hard. Yeah.
No, that's right. I mean, it is an industry that it's lucrative. The returns are strong. They get high. They get their 10 to 15% management fee. So it's if you get $150,000 a year for easy maths, 10%, it's $15,000 a year. It's a lot more than you'll get at a 8% of $40,000 a year for a non-residential. So it's good returns for them. It has had a lot of people come into the market. But yeah, I think, do they work with supervisors? Are they connected to support coordinators? What are their pathways, their network of where people with a disability are right now?
My last question to you, Peter, is what final words of advice do you have to any new investor looking into this SDA space?
Well, look, definitely do your research. Get your finance sorted out first. You do need to speak to, I'm sure Minh would have somebody you can speak to that specialises in NDIS funding, because many people will waste time going through the broker. They said they can get funding, but then months later they realise they can't. So before you do anything, I would certainly be coming to Minh or searching somebody who has NDIS funding experience and access to the funds, because I'll do a commercial valuation and you'll get a much higher valuation, so you're not putting in too much of your own money. You can start with 10% deposit. So yeah, that's the first thing. Make sure you can get the funding, and then what's your comfortable budget, your investment? What is right for you? You might be able to borrow $1.5 million, but you might only be comfortable with $900,000 or $1 million. So you got to work out what is right for you. And when it comes to budget as well, because of the importance of getting good quality land in good locations, I would certainly be, if you can borrow $1.5 million and you think $900,000 is your comfortable part, I would also consider looking at that a little bit more expensive land, therefore might be around the $1.1 million. You are you're going to get a very solid long-term investment if you can afford it. If you can't afford it, then you invest what you can afford and what you're comfortable investing in. And also to then consider your buying entity. If you're already on good income, then consider looking at setting up a trust or a company and buying through that. That way, your income won't affect your taxable income from your payroll tax as much. Again, I'm not a tax agent. I'm not a financial advisor. It's not financial advice, but I just see it all the time. I see clients get to a point that they're almost ready to get out conditional finance, and they'll talk to their accountant, and their accountant will say, well, maybe you should have bought that in a trust, and they want to change the entity, which can really, might be too late, or it can really slow down the process. So work out what is right for you for your finances first, what you can borrow, what's the entity, and then just talk to the right people like yourself, man, and your team on where is the demand now, or what locations around the country should I be building in, and what is the right investment for me. Am I looking for an affordable property around the 650 mark? Might be a robust property, or might be a high fiscal support property which is higher returns. Work out what is right for you, and just make sure when you're investing that your floor plans are good quality. The inclusions are there. It is full turnkey. You've got everything ready to go. You're working with a good SDA provider, and you speak to the SDA provider, like I said before you are financially committed, so you're 100% confident in your own decision. Because working with people like yourself, men, and other companies and people that I work with as well, we have a real passion to build quality homes in good locations and good developments around the country, but we aren't the SDA provider or the SIL provider. We build for them, directly for them, and they buy properties directly through us as well for themselves. But as an investor, you want to make sure you're talking to them and make sure you're comfortable with your investment. It's an awesome investment for yourself, importantly for the people with disability, and it helps the government as well. So it's all around win-win.
Wonderful. Peter, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate your pearls of wisdom and your experience the last few years in the Ndis space. Our business here are looking forward to working with you long-term with your mentorship and your supply of stock for us to recommend to our investors as well, all around Australia.
Fantastic, Minh. I appreciate the time, and thanks to all the listeners. I hope I gave you some value today. And feel free to ask any questions. I'm always happy to answer anything.
And Peter, if we have any clients who would like a one-on-one with us, as a three-way Zoom call with us and you and them on a topic like Darwin, is it okay to book a little 30-minute session with you? Is that okay?
No, certainly, mate. Just as long as you book me in, I'm very busy. But and if you've got clients with their own land, Minh, that's another point. It's always, we get approached all the time with people with their own land, and land is hard to come by. So we're always looking for good land. So if you have investors out there that have their own land they're considering building on, or they have an old investment property they want to knock down and build an NDIS property on, definitely reach out to us. We're certainly happy to help. The first step would be talking to the SDA supervisors, make sure they have demand in that location. If we get the go ahead, then we can talk about what you could build on your property. So happy to help however we can.
Wonderful. Done. Thank you very much, mate. Bye-bye.
Thanks, man. Cheers. All the best, mate. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.